The maintenance corridor smelled like hot stone and recycled air. Owen Rail had been in worse places, a flooded inspection shaft in Turkey, a bridge pier in Iceland while it was failing, but those places hadn't tried to remind him that he didn't belong. Saren Station did. The ceilings were 4 meters up. The door frames were cut for bodies half a foot taller than his. Every surface was polished orith crystal that caught his face and gave it back looking like a man who wasn't sure what he was doing there. He'd been on the station 11 days. 2 technical reports filed. 14 meals eaten alone. 3 real conversations with Varadi, all minor staff, none of them his assigned handler. His official title was Human Technical Liaison, Acoustic Systems. His actual job, as best he could work out after 11 days of watching things run, was to exist on the station so both governments could say the exchange program was happening. The Varadi human framework needed a human face on site. Owen was the face. The real work, an acoustic audit of the outer communication arrays, could have been done in 4 days by anyone with his training. He'd stretched it to 11 because there was nothing particular waiting for him when he finished. He walked the lower maintenance corridor every evening. No route required it. The corridor ran under the station's core structure, and Owen thought through problems on his feet. Old habit from years of fieldwork, where the answers were usually in the walls. On the 11th evening, second pass down the corridor, he stopped. Not because he heard something. He felt it. A pressure behind his back teeth. Low, faint, the kind the body picks up before the brain has a word for it. He'd felt something close to it once, standing too near a glacier in Iceland about 90 seconds before it broke apart. The sensation of mass committing to something. He stood still for 30 seconds. Nobody came through. The feeling stayed. He mentioned it to Cell the next morning. Cell was his protocol officer, young, efficient, practiced at giving useless answers in a pleasant tone. Human auditory sensitivity was known to misfire in pressurized environments. The station's thermal systems produced background vibration. Formal technical concerns went through the liaison portal, 5 to 7 day window. Owen thanked him and dropped it. That evening he pulled the acoustic analyzer from the case under his bunk. He'd brought it from habit, the way some people pack a backup torch for a job where nobody asked for one. He swept his quarters, then the hallway, then walked the lower passage again with the unit running. 18.4 hertz. He stopped and stared at the number. Infrasound. Below the floor of normal human hearing, not below his equipment. And not, he thought about it now, entirely below what the body could feel at close range. The pressure behind his teeth. The low wrongness in his chest he hadn't been able to name. That had been the signal coming through the floor and the walls before his ears had anything to catch. He sat against the crystal wall and thought it through. Infrasound came from natural sources. Ocean swell, geological movement, heavy machinery under load. It also came from purpose-built devices when you needed an effect without an audible signature. He didn't know which this was yet. What he knew, the signal was clean, directional. Natural infrasound spreads out and drops off with distance. This one didn't spread. It pulsed at a consistent frequency, held a single line, and was strongest here in the lower section, directly below the throne chamber. He went back to his quarters and opened the diplomatic briefing packet at the physiology section he'd skimmed on day one. It was filed under physiological differences, points of interest, written like someone had ticked a box. Varadi auditory range, 60 Hz to 80 kHz. 18 Hz didn't exist for them, not within 40 Hz of their range. He ran calculations on natural infrasound sources common to pressurized orbital stations. Compressors, docking resonance, atmospheric cycling. He checked each against his data. None matched. Natural sources varied and scattered. This one didn't. It held a single frequency and pointed at one location. He stared at the readout for a while. He was a structural acoustics engineer from Earth. His job here was to audit arrays and appear in photographs. No useful clearance, no investigative authority, no particular reason anyone would listen to a man describing a feeling in his jaw and a number on a handheld screen. But there wasn't a single person on Saren Station who could hear what his equipment was reading. Not one. Whatever that signal was, it had been placed exactly where it was with that fact counted on. He set his alarm and lay back in the dark. Share. The station didn't notice Owen moving through it. That turned out to be the advantage. He spent 2 days mapping the signal, walking every corridor his work card would open with the analyzer in his jacket pocket and a maintenance tablet in his hand as cover. If a Varadi staff member glanced his way, he was reviewing interference data from the outer arrays. Nobody looked closely. He was the human technician doing routine work, and routine work was all anyone expected from him. He logged 24 readings across 3 levels and plotted them each evening on his tablet. The outer arrays showed low, scattered readings. The admin corridors ran a little stronger. The lower maintenance passage came in at 17.8 Hz on the first day, 18.3 Hz on the second, rising slowly in one direction. The signal wasn't coming from machinery or vents. It was moving through the orith crystal in the walls and floors, conducting through the mineral structure the way sound travels through bone, spreading outward from one concentrated point in the station's lower core. He needed someone who understood what orith crystal did under load. He needed someone he could trust. Counselor Finn had spoken to Owen 3 times since arrival. At a reception on day 2, where he'd asked a real question about Earth's ocean floor with actual curiosity rather than diplomatic courtesy. In the station library on day 6, where he'd pointed Owen to a text on pre-Empire acoustic engineering that Owen hadn't known existed. Once in a corridor, briefly, where he'd said good morning in a way that meant it. Owen went to find him. Finn's office was 3 levels up, small room, shelves of crystal tablets on every wall, 2 chairs that looked like they hadn't moved in years. He listened without interrupting while Owen walked through the data. Heat map, trend line, directional focus, the daily rise. When Owen finished, Finn reached for a reference volume without being asked and opened it to the Varadi physiological specification. He set it beside Owen's tablet. Varadi hearing, 60 Hz to 80 kHz. Owen's signal was running at 18 to 19 Hz and climbing about 0.06 Hz a day. He showed Finn the projection. 9 days until the Grand Conclave, the day the Resonance Throne activated at full sovereign bond for the first time in a generation. At the current rate, the signal would hit 19.1 Hz on that day. At that frequency, its harmonic overtones would start entering the lower edge of Varadi hearing. Not as a warning. Finn asked what happened to orith crystal under sustained infrasound during a full activation cycle. Owen said, the throne is a piezoelectric amplifier. It converts the sovereign's neural signal into a broadcast that reaches every colony in the empire. During full sovereign bond, the amplification factor is in the thousands. The Orith Foundation stores bioenergy accumulated over decades. Finn said, if a resonance signal is feeding into that base at the moment of full activation, the stored energy doesn't discharge cleanly. The throne amplifies the disruptive input alongside everything else. It doesn't distinguish between what it's supposed to carry and what it isn't. He paused. He said, the chamber wouldn't survive it. Everything inside it wouldn't. The Grand Conclave, every great lord in the empire, the sovereign, every major family's head of household, in one room, for the first time in a generation. Owen looked at the heat map. The signal pulsed once while he watched. He said, someone put it there? Finn said, yes. They sat with that for a moment. Owen asked, should we go to the security directorate? Finn said, not yet. He said it carefully, the tone of someone who'd watched institutions fail at the precise moments they mattered. He wanted to check one thing first. The maintenance access logs for the throne substructure. Who'd been inside it over the past 3 months and why. He asked whether Owen's work access could reach those records through the array's archive. Owen said, the array's system shares a route with the structural maintenance database. It might be possible. Finn stood up and reached for his clearance card. Outside in the corridor, the station was carrying on normally, staff moving, conclave preparations building quietly in the background. Nobody looked at either of them. Owen followed Finn toward the lower archive level. In his jacket pocket, the analyzer was still running its quiet sweep. 18.6 Hz now. Still climbing. The names in the maintenance logs were the problem. The numbers Owen already had. Finn sat at the archive terminal in the lower records room and worked through 3 encoding formats to reach the pre-modern throne substructure files. The room was cold and lit pale blue by a single overhead bar. Outside, the station was deep in conclave preparations. Crystal panels going up along the main concourse, supply shipments arriving from 6 colony systems at once. Nobody came down here. The dust on the terminal casing made that clear. The files loaded slowly. Finn translated the old indexing under his breath. Owen stood and waited. 6 entries. Throne chamber substructure access, filed across the past 3 months. Each one carried the same description: routine vibration calibration, pre-conclave structural inspection. All 6 logged under the same household staff designation: Lord Darren's technical team. Owen didn't know the name. He asked. Finn read through the 6 entries a second time before he looked up. Darren was a second-tier noble. Under the old charter rules, first in the succession line if the sovereign died without a named heir. Severick had governed for 60 years and hadn't yet designated a successor. This was known, discussed in certain circles with a frequency Severick had chosen not to acknowledge. Owen said, and Darren's position in those circles? Finn said, patient, quiet. He'd spent 2 years placing people inside the security directorate, not in command positions, support roles, review officers, scheduling staff. Nothing that looked wrong on its own. Just enough that the apparatus had a lean to it in certain directions when things needed to move fast. Owen looked at the timestamp on the first entry. 4 days after Severick publicly announced the conclave date. The subsequent entries were spread carefully across 90 days, never close enough together to flag an automated review. The descriptions across all 6 were identical, which by itself wouldn't trigger anything. Someone had studied how these logs were reviewed and designed the access pattern to produce no result worth investigating. He thought about what that required. Patience, detailed knowledge of the logging protocols, planning that had started before the public announcement, when only a small group would have known the date at all. He asked, what happens to the Empire if the chamber goes? Finn said, the charter allows a 60-day succession claim period after a sovereign dies without a named heir. Any lord who can hold territory and muster support may file. The serious claimants would normally number a dozen. Most of them would be in the chamber. Owen said, so the field clears itself. Finn said, yes. They were quiet for a moment. Owen said, what can we actually do? Finn said the device was in the substructure. If they could reach it before the activation ceremony, there might be a way to disable it directly. Owen said, I can generate a counter frequency through my analyzer. Infrasound cancels through destructive interference. The exact inverse signal at matching amplitude neutralizes the source. The problem is range. My unit covers about 2 meters around its speaker output. The device is embedded in 40 meters of orith crystal substrate in every direction from the source. 2 meters doesn't touch it. Finn said, is there a larger broadcast system? Owen said, the palace ceremonial acoustic array. Crystal panels built into every wall and floor surface throughout the station. Designed to carry the sovereign's voice simultaneously across the whole station during activation ceremonies. If I can route my inverse frequency through that system and target it at the substructure feeds under the throne chamber, the signal would travel through the crystal the same way the device's signal does. It'd reach everywhere the device reaches. Finn said, the array console is in the throne chamber. I don't hold clearance to operate it for non-standard broadcasts. Owen said, is there any other way in? Finn was quiet. He looked at the archive terminal, at the old encoding formats still on the screen. Something in his expression shifted, the look of a man opening a drawer he hadn't opened in a long time. He said, there's one provision. Very old. I need to verify it's still in the operating code. He turned back to the terminal and started searching a different index. Owen watched the screen from behind him. Finn found it. Read it twice. The ridge structures along the back of his neck shifted slightly upward, the Varadi equivalent of sitting up straighter. He said, there's a way in, but we'd need to be in the chamber when the ceremony starts. Owen said, then we handle the tunnels first and the chamber second. He pulled out his tablet and opened the substructure layout. They had work to do. Owen gave the official channels 1 full day. Not because he thought they'd work. He needed to know for certain they wouldn't. He submitted a formal request for urgent technical consultation with the Security Directorate at 0800 through the Diplomatic Liaison portal. The portal confirmed receipt and assigned a standard processing window, 48 to 72 hours. The duty officer who logged it didn't look up from his console while doing so. Owen stood in front of the desk for 4 seconds after the confirmation printed, waiting to see if there was more. There wasn't. Next stop was Brayscale, the human diplomatic liaison who kept a small office near the docking ring and had the face of a man who'd spent 20 years delivering bad news with good posture. Owen sat across from him and laid out the whole picture. The signal data, the trend projection, the schematics, the maintenance logs, the name in those logs, what the numbers said would happen when the throne activated in 8 days with a 19 Hz resonance source embedded in its crystal base. Gale listened carefully, said he believed every word. Said that wasn't the issue. The issue, a formal diplomatic challenge against a first-tier Varadi noble, required corroborating physical evidence, a second technical assessment from a registered reviewer, and embassy authorization. The embassy representative communicated through a secure relay with a 3-day processing window. Even if the representative responded immediately, the legal review moved in weeks. Not in the time available. Gale said he'd log the report and flag it to the embassy at the highest priority his office could assign. He said he was sorry that wasn't more useful. He sounded like he'd been sorry in exactly this way before and had stopped looking for a better version of it. Owen thanked him and walked out. He noticed the 2 men on the 3rd-level concourse. Varadi, plain household dress, keeping pace about 20 meters behind him. He turned left into a side passage. They turned. He stopped at a structural panel on the wall and read the maintenance label for 30 seconds. They stopped. When he moved again, they moved again. They weren't trying to close the distance. They just needed to know where he was. He walked directly to Finn's office and knocked once. Finn said he'd expected something like it. A contact in the admin staff had warned him that morning. Darren's household had flagged the meetings between Finn and the human liaison as a point of interest. Owen asked, "Does it change the plan?" Finn said, "It moves the schedule. Tonight instead of tomorrow." They had 8 days until the conclave. In practice, a few hours. Every hour Darren's people watched Owen was an hour for the picture to get clear enough to act on, which meant Owen disappearing through some administrative process, the device sitting undisturbed, the problem solved in a way that left no trace of itself. The plan was simple. Enter the maintenance tunnels through the ventilation corridor in Owen's work section, where his access card legitimately covered the first 2 security doors. From there, a pre-Empire utility passage Finn had found in the old architectural records ran parallel to the active maintenance tunnels. It wasn't on the current security grid, hadn't been updated in over 200 years, and nobody alive on the station had thought about it. Owen would follow the signal. When they found the device, he'd attempt the counter frequency at close range. If the device wasn't yet in full coupling with the throne's power signature, the analyzer's own output might be enough. If the coupling was too far along, they'd need the ceremonial array console in the throne chamber instead. That second option meant walking into the ceremony while it was already running. Owen hadn't fully worked out how he felt about that part. He didn't mention it. Finn had reached 3 people he trusted, retired honor guards, older men who'd served the sovereign directly for decades and owed Darren nothing. They answered within the hour. They didn't need long explanations. Owen went back to his quarters with 2 hours to go. The Watcher's shadow was still at the base of his door. He left the lights off, sat on the edge of his bunk, and traced the tunnel layout on his tablet until he could do it without looking. He checked the analyzer's charge. He set the counter frequency parameters from scratch, twice, to make sure they were right. At 0145, he pocketed the knee pads, stood up, and left through the emergency egress panel in the rear wall. The one Cell had pointed out on day 1 and never mentioned again. He didn't look back at the shadow under the door. Nobody was watching the ventilation access corridor at 0200. That was the only part of the plan that went right from the start. Owen's card handled the first door. The second required Finn to hold his clearance chip against the reader for 4 seconds longer than standard protocol, which produced a red light and then a green one. The third door was already open. Its seal had corroded at some point in the last decade, and nobody had filed a repair order. Past it, the pre-Empire utility passage began. The ceiling dropped to 1.5 meters. Owen put the knee pads on before the first crawl section. They helped with the stone. They didn't help with the heat. The orth crystal in the walls pulled thermal output from the station's core and radiated it right back. 30 meters in, and his shirt was soaked through. Behind him, Finn moved without complaint. The 3 retired guards moved with the particular quiet of people who'd learned in their younger years that silence was a discipline, not a default. Owen navigated by the analyzer, checking the signal every 30 seconds and adjusting their path at each junction. The frequency was at 19.0 Hz. The device had been reading the throne's power signature for 3 days. The palace ran pre-conclave activation diagnostics on a rolling schedule, and the device was calibrating itself to that pattern, building toward a coupling it intended to complete the moment the real activation began. 13 hours. 26 minutes into the tunnels, Owen stopped and pressed his palm flat against the right side wall. The display showed peak signal. Right here. Through the crystal, he could feel it. A vibration that wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite a physical sensation, somewhere between the two. The same frequency his body had been reading for 2 weeks, now concentrated to a point. The wall looked like normal orth. Pale, faintly self-lit, fractured in several places where the stone had shifted over centuries of orbital operation. In one of those fractures, 40 centimeters above the tunnel floor, a thin painted shell sat flush with the surrounding surface. Color matched to the wall. Under normal light and Varadi vision, invisible. Under the analyzer's scan output, a clean, concentrated circle 12 centimeters across. Owen pressed 2 fingers to the edge of it. The vibration was real under his fingertips. From the far end of the passage, 2 shadows moved, fast and together, which meant they'd been briefed and positioned ahead of time, not just stumbling across the intrusion. One of the retired guards said something short in Old Varadi. All 3 of them moved at once. The tunnel was too narrow for anything tactical. What followed was 90 seconds of close, fast, very loud work that Owen stayed out of by keeping his back to the wall beside the device. 2 of Darren's agents went down. He heard it more than saw it. The third came from Owen's side, low and aimed at the smallest person in the group. The logic was reasonable. It ran into the fact that Owen had his acoustic analyzer in his right hand and reacted faster than either of them expected. Corner edge. Direct swing. The man sat against the crystal wall and didn't immediately try to get back up. Owen's left elbow reported the transaction in considerable detail. He wrapped it against his side and turned back to the device. He spent 3 minutes examining it, moving the analyzer slowly across the painted surface. The shell was fused to the substrate, not fastened or glued but grown into the crystal matrix over weeks of careful work. He couldn't pull it free. If he broke the shell, the activation sequence would trigger immediately. The coupling to the throne's signature was already at 83%. At that level, removing the device didn't stop it. It removed the delay mechanism. He couldn't take it out. He looked at Finn and said so. Finn said, "The ceremony is in 13 hours. Owen said, "I know. The analyzer can generate the counter frequency, but the broadcast range is 2 meters. The signal is running through 40 meters of orth substrate in every direction from this point. 2 meters is nothing." He paused. He said, "The palace ceremonial array would cover it. Every crystal surface in the station, all routed from one console." Finn said, "The console is in the throne chamber. The ceremony starts in 13 hours. The chamber will be full." Owen said, "Then we need to be there when it is." Finn looked at him for a moment. Then he started moving back toward the tunnel entrance without saying anything else. Owen took a last reading from the device, 19.0 hertz, steady, climbing, and followed him out. They came up out of the tunnels into a side corridor 2 levels below the throne chamber with 12 minutes to spare. Owen's elbow was wrapped in thermal bandage from Finn's kit. His knees were scraped. He still had 3 hours of tunnel sweat on him and smelled accordingly. He looked considerably worse than the occasion called for. Finn said nothing about this. They took the lift to the throne level. The grand hall was full. Every great lord of the Varadi Empire stood on the floor below the gallery tiers in full rank dress, crests raised, household sigils mounted, hundreds of delegates filling the upper levels. Every major family in the empire in one room for the first time in a generation. At the center, on the raised dais, High Sovereign Severick sat within the throne's bond initiation frame. The orth crystal around the dais was already active, a low, building pressure Owen could feel in the soles of his boots and the back of his teeth. The right version, the one that was supposed to be there. He scanned the room. The ceremonial array console was set into the left wall, unoccupied. He found Darren at the same moment. Left side of the floor, surrounded by his household group. Darren saw them walk in. His face didn't change. His weight shifted toward the nearest exit, barely, a fraction of a degree, visible only if you were watching for it. His eyes moved once to 2 staff members at the edge of his group. Finn walked directly to the array console. He placed both hands on the panel edge and spoke 2 words in Old Varadi. The resonance alert of the Throne Guardian. Owen hadn't known the phrase existed until Finn found it in the archive 3 nights ago. An emergency provision from the founding legal code, written by the Empire's first architects for one specific situation. A threat to the throne that couldn't go through normal channels because those channels had been compromised. It bypassed every directorate and every clearance level. It answered to the throne's own operating system and nothing else. The console unlocked. 90 seconds. Murmuring started in the gallery tiers. 2 of Severic's honor guard crossed the floor. Darren took a second step toward the exit, then a third. Owen plugged the acoustic analyzer into the console's input port. The parameters were already set. He'd written them the previous night in the dark of his quarters while the Watcher's shadow sat under his door. Inverse of 19.1 Hz. Amplitude matched to Orith's substrate propagation. Routed to the crystal panel feeds in the lower levels, not the room's own speakers. The broadcast wouldn't make a sound anybody could hear. It would travel through the palace's crystal bones, downward, into the substrate, into the fault line below the chamber floor where the device was sitting at 83% coupling and still climbing. He confirmed the parameters. Pressed the broadcast key. The hall heard nothing. 19.1 Hz wasn't in Virati range. Wasn't in Owen's range either. The signal went straight from the analyzer into the palace's acoustic infrastructure, into every crystal vein in the lower levels, traveling the same paths the device had been using for weeks to carry its pulse outward. It arrived at the device from every direction at once, same amplitude, opposite phase. The device's pre-activation pulse reached its trigger point and found its exact inverse already there. The signal canceled. Owen's display read 0 Hz. Darren was 4 steps from the exit when the 3 retired guards stepped out of the passage doorway. They'd come up through a secondary tunnel access, while Owen and Finn came through the main lift. Darren stopped. He was a careful man. He didn't run. He turned back to the room and saw what it had become. Hundreds of eyes, Severic's among them. A hall full of people who understood something had shifted and were waiting to learn what. The security detail took him and his staff within the hour. A forensics team went into the substructure with equipment that made Owen's analyzer look like something from the previous century. They recovered the device in 2 hours. The conclave was suspended and reconvened 3 days later, after the chamber and substructure were fully cleared. Severick met Owen 2 days after that in a small room off the throne corridor. No titles, no staff, no formal setting. Just the 2 of them and a table. Severick asked, "How did you find it?" Owen explained. Human infrasound sensitivity. The gap between the 20 Hz floor of human hearing and the 60 Hz floor of Virati hearing. The body's ability to feel what the ears technically couldn't. It wasn't an exceptional ability. Every human had it. A leftover from evolving on a world full of things that made low, dangerous sounds before they showed themselves. Nobody had thought to study it in a non-human diplomatic context. Nobody had looked for a threat designed to live specifically in the range between what 2 species could hear. Severick was quiet for a moment. He said, "You heard what no one in this empire could hear, and you kept going when no one would help you. Why?" Owen said, "The noise was wrong. That's always been enough reason." Severick looked at him across the table, said nothing for a few seconds. Then, "Yes, I think I understand that." Owen's report to Earth ended with one line of recommendation. Human acoustic sensitivity in the sub-60 Hz range may carry operational value in non-human environments. Recommend formal assessment. Somewhere in the Virati Imperial Archive, a new entry was filed. Human physiological data, auditory, notes, infrasound detection, 18 to 20 Hz range. Strategic significance, confirmed. Status, under review. The throne held. The Empire went on. Not one person in the Grand Hall that day had heard what saved them.